Kate's first international trip since her cancer recovery, stepping out on her own, a research trip of sorts, learning about a cause she cares deeply about.
Thousands of people have packed the square. People are hanging out the windows, and you can see her right here, meeting some of her littlest fans.
Something about the timing felt impossible to ignore. At a moment when questions surrounding the future of the monarchy were already growing louder, a new development emerged that seemed to place Catherine, Princess of Wales, closer to the center of royal authority than ever before. What appeared at first to be a ceremonial adjustment soon raised a much larger question. Was this simply an act of trust, or was the monarchy quietly preparing for a future that many believed was still years away? For months, public attention had largely focused on the health of King Charles III. Official statements remained measured and carefully worded, yet every appearance, every adjustment to the royal calendar, and every update from Buckingham Palace seemed to generate fresh discussion about what the coming years might look like for the institution he now leads. The situation became even more intriguing because of the contrast that royal observers began noticing. On one hand, the king continued carrying out important constitutional duties and public engagements whenever possible. On the other, Prince William, the Prince of Wales, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, appeared to be assuming an increasingly visible role in representing the future of the crown. At first glance, that might seem entirely natural. After all, every monarchy must prepare the next generation for greater responsibility. Yet some commentators argued that what was happening went beyond ordinary preparation. They pointed to a series of developments that appeared connected, even if no official announcement linked them together. And this is where the story begins to take a more fascinating turn. When King Charles received his cancer diagnosis in 2024, the palace understandably chose to keep many details private. The public was informed that treatment was underway, but specific medical information remained closely guarded. That decision reflected a long-standing royal tradition of protecting personal health matters, particularly when they involve the sovereign. Yet uncertainty has a way of creating questions. As months passed, many people began wondering not simply how the king was feeling, but how the monarchy itself was adapting behind the scenes. What preparations were being made, who was taking on additional responsibilities, and perhaps most importantly, who had earned the monarch's deepest confidence during one of the most challenging periods of his reign. The answers did not arrive through dramatic announcements. Instead, they emerged through a series of subtle but meaningful developments that only became clear when viewed together. One of the most significant involved the growing public role of Catherine. For years, she had built a reputation for reliability, discipline, and an ability to navigate royal life without generating unnecessary controversy. While other members of the royal family often found themselves at the center of headlines, Catherine's approach was markedly different. She rarely sought attention for its own sake, yet consistently managed to strengthen her public standing. That distinction matters because within royal institutions, trust is often accumulated quietly rather than dramatically. Observers began noting that the Princess of Wales was increasingly being associated with some of the monarchy's most important traditions and symbols. Appearances that might once have been viewed as routine suddenly carried additional significance. Historic jewelry, prominent ceremonial roles, and highly visible engagements seemed to suggest that her position within the royal household was evolving. But was that interpretation accurate? Some royal commentators believed it was. Others cautioned against reading too much into symbolic gestures. After all, royal history is filled with moments that generated speculation without ultimately signaling constitutional change. Yet another detail soon entered the conversation. Reports emerged suggesting that King Charles had become increasingly focused on ensuring continuity within the institution. Rather than waiting for future circumstances to force difficult decisions, the monarch appeared determined to strengthen the next generation's readiness in advance. If that was indeed the strategy, then both William and Catherine occupied a uniquely important position. The Prince of Wales had already begun undertaking a broader range of responsibilities traditionally associated with senior royal leadership. From diplomatic engagements to major ceremonial functions, his public profile increasingly reflected the role he would one day inherit. Yet what surprised many observers was the attention shifting toward Catherine at the same time. Why her? Why now? And why did so many palace watchers believe that her influence within the monarchy had grown more dramatically over the past 2 years than at any previous stage of her royal life. Part of the answer may lie in the challenges she faced personally. While the public was processing concerns about the king's health, Catherine herself was confronting a serious medical battle. Her cancer diagnosis and subsequent treatment removed her from public life for a significant period, creating uncertainty and concern across the United Kingdom and beyond. When she eventually returned to public duties, however, something had changed. The Princess of Wales appeared more confident, more assured, and in the eyes of many supporters, more central to the monarchy's future narrative than ever before. That transformation did not happen overnight. It was built through resilience, patience, and a willingness to endure intense public scrutiny while remaining focused on duty. Those qualities earned admiration from supporters, but perhaps more importantly, they may also have strengthened her standing within the institution itself. And that raises a question that becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. If King Charles is indeed looking toward the long-term future of the monarchy, could Catherine's growing prominence be part of a much larger plan? Could the developments people are witnessing today represent only the first stage of a broader transition taking shape behind palace walls? Because as we'll see next, the Princess of Wales's rise did not begin with ceremonial honors or public appearances. It began years earlier, through a series of decisions, sacrifices, and challenges that quietly transformed Catherine from a royal newcomer into one of the most influential figures in the modern monarchy. What makes this story particularly intriguing is that Catherine's growing prominence cannot be understood simply by looking at her public appearances. The deeper significance may lie in something far less visible, the changing balance of trust inside the monarchy itself. Throughout royal history, influence has rarely depended solely on titles. Some individuals hold prestigious positions, yet exercise little real influence behind palace walls, while others gradually become indispensable because senior members of the institution come to rely on their judgment. For many royal observers, Catherine increasingly appears to belong to the second category. That perception became more noticeable as Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace navigated one of the most challenging periods in recent royal history. The monarchy was simultaneously dealing with health concerns involving both the sovereign and the Princess of Wales herself, while continuing to project stability to the public. Such circumstances place enormous pressure on royal households, forcing difficult decisions about responsibilities, representation, and long-term planning. Under those conditions, trust becomes one of the institution's most valuable assets. And that raises an interesting question. If the monarchy is quietly identifying the individual's best position to guide it through future challenges, what qualities would matter most? Would it be popularity, experience, seniority, or something less visible but ultimately more important? Some royal commentators argue that Catherine's greatest strength has never been public performance alone. Instead, they point to her ability to avoid becoming the story herself. In an era when public figures often dominate headlines through controversy or personal disputes, the Princess of Wales has generally maintained a reputation for consistency. That may sound unremarkable at first, but within a centuries-old institution built on continuity, consistency can become a powerful form of influence. The significance of that approach becomes clearer when compared with the turbulent periods the royal family has experienced over the past decade. Public disagreements, media controversies, and shifting perceptions have repeatedly forced the institution to respond to unexpected challenges. Through much of that period, Catherine's image remained largely associated with stability, family life, and duty. But was that merely good fortune, or was it part of a broader strategy? Some observers believe her rise has been carefully managed over many years. Rather than accelerating her visibility too quickly, royal advisors appeared willing to allow her role to expand gradually. Each new responsibility built upon the last, creating an impression of steady growth rather than sudden promotion. That approach may have proven particularly effective because it allowed public confidence to develop naturally. Yet another layer of the story emerges when we examine how the monarchy has historically prepared future queens. Unlike future kings, whose constitutional role is clearly defined from birth, future queens often occupy a more complicated position. Their authority is rarely formalized in the same way, yet their influence can become enormous depending on circumstances. History offers numerous examples of royal consorts whose impact extended far beyond ceremonial appearances. The question many royal watchers now ask is whether Catherine is following a similar trajectory. Not because she is seeking power for its own sake, but because the institution itself may increasingly view her as essential to its future image. In modern royal life, public confidence matters enormously. A monarchy cannot rely solely on tradition. It must also maintain relevance and trust among the population it serves. That challenge becomes even more important during periods of uncertainty. As discussions surrounding the future of the crown continue, attention has naturally focused on Prince William. That is entirely understandable. As heir to the throne, his future role is obvious. Yet some analysts suggest that concentrating exclusively on the future king risks overlooking another crucial element of the equation. What kind of monarchy will William inherit? And perhaps just as importantly, who will help him shape it? Those questions have become increasingly relevant because the Prince and Princess of Wales often appear to operate as a highly coordinated partnership. Their public engagements, charitable initiatives, and long-term projects frequently reflect a shared vision rather than separate agendas. That dynamic has not gone unnoticed inside royal circles. Historically, successful royal transitions have often depended on strong partnerships at the top of the institution. Stability during one generation frequently influences confidence in the next. If that pattern holds true today, then Catherine's importance may extend far beyond her individual responsibilities. She may represent something larger, a bridge between the monarchy's traditional foundations and its modern future. But that possibility introduces another fascinating dimension to the story. If senior figures are indeed positioning the Princess of Wales closer to the symbolic heart of the institution, what message does that send to other members of the royal family? Royal households are complex organizations filled with established hierarchies, expectations, and relationships. Any perceived shift in influence inevitably attracts attention, even when no formal changes are announced. This does not necessarily mean conflict exists behind the scenes. However, history shows that moments of transition often reshape internal dynamics in ways that are not immediately obvious to the public. And that is why recent developments have generated so much discussion. Because what appears on the surface to be a series of ceremonial decisions may actually reflect something much broader, a monarchy quietly adapting to changing circumstances while attempting to preserve continuity at every stage of the process. The challenge, however, is that adaptation often creates new questions. If Catherine's role is expanding, how far might that evolution eventually go? If William is assuming greater responsibility, what does that reveal about preparations taking place behind closed doors? And perhaps most importantly, are these developments simply prudent planning, or do they indicate that the institution expects major changes sooner than many people realize? Those questions become even more compelling when we examine the growing role of the Prince of Wales himself, because the responsibilities, now falling onto William's shoulders, may reveal more about the monarchy's future direction than any official statement ever could. Those questions become even more compelling when we examine the growing role of the Prince of Wales himself, because the responsibilities, now falling onto William's shoulders, may reveal more about the monarchy's future direction than any official statement ever could. What makes this development particularly significant is that the British monarchy has always been an institution obsessed with continuity. Governments change, political leaders come and go, public opinion rises and falls, yet the crown survives by convincing people that stability exists even when circumstances become uncertain. The challenge facing the royal family today is that continuity must be demonstrated at the same time as adaptation. Those two goals do not always move comfortably together. That tension may explain why recent developments have attracted so much attention among palace watchers. Historically, monarchs have often strengthened key figures around them long before any major transition becomes necessary. Not because change is imminent, but because uncertainty itself can become destabilizing if preparations are not already in place. Looking back through royal history, one pattern appears repeatedly. Successful transitions rarely begin when a crown changes hands. They begin years earlier, through careful positioning, trust building, and the gradual elevation of individuals expected to safeguard the institution's future. Could that be what is happening now? The question becomes even more interesting when viewed through the lens of public perception. Modern monarchies operate under a level of scrutiny that previous generations could hardly imagine. Every appearance is photographed, every gesture analyzed, and every decision discussed across television, newspapers, and social media platforms within minutes. Under those conditions, symbolism becomes a form of communication. What the public sees may not always reveal official strategy, but it often reveals institutional priorities. Over recent years, one pattern has become increasingly difficult to ignore. Whenever the monarchy seeks to project stability, continuity, and reassurance, the Prince and Princess of Wales frequently find themselves at the center of that message. That observation has led some commentators to propose a fascinating theory. Perhaps the real story is not about individual appointments, ceremonial responsibilities, or isolated decisions. Perhaps the larger objective is to strengthen public confidence in the next era of the monarchy before that era officially arrives. If that interpretation is correct, then every carefully planned appearance serves a broader purpose. Yet there is another layer to this story that receives far less attention. Royal institutions do not operate solely through constitutional authority. They also depend on relationships, trust between family members, confidence among senior advisors, and cooperation between different royal households all influence how effectively the monarchy functions behind the scenes. When viewed from that perspective, the growing prominence of Catherine takes on additional significance. Observers frequently focus on her popularity with the public, but insiders often point to something different. They highlight her ability to work across different parts of the institution without becoming a source of internal controversy. In a family that has experienced periods of intense public pressure, that characteristic may carry more weight than many people realize. Why? Because institutions under pressure tend to value predictability. The monarchy has spent the past several years navigating challenges that extend far beyond ceremonial duties. Public debates surrounding relevance, generational change, media relationships, and the future role of the royal family have all intensified. Every major institution eventually faces moments when it must decide whether to resist change or carefully manage it. The Crown appears to be attempting the latter. And that brings us to an intriguing contradiction. On one hand, Buckingham Palace consistently emphasizes continuity. On the other, many of the developments attracting attention suggest quiet modernization occurring beneath the surface. New approaches to public engagement, greater focus on specific charitable causes, and a more visible effort to connect royal work with contemporary issues all point toward gradual evolution. The Prince and Princess of Wales stand at the center of much of that evolution. Not because they are abandoning tradition, but because they appear to be redefining how tradition is presented to a modern audience. Could that explain why their influence seems to be expanding? Some royal analysts believe it does. They argue that future survival of the monarchy depends less on preserving every historical practice and more on preserving public confidence in the institution itself. If so, individuals capable of bridging past and future become enormously valuable. Yet perhaps the most revealing clue lies elsewhere. While public discussions often focus on titles, ceremonies, and constitutional roles, senior royal figures frequently speak about service. Duty remains one of the monarchy's defining principles. Those who rise within the institution tend to be those viewed as reliable custodians rather than ambitious power seekers. That distinction matters because it shapes how influence is granted. The most trusted figures are often those perceived as strengthening the institution rather than drawing attention toward themselves. Many supporters believe that Catherine's reputation has been built precisely on that foundation. Whether that perception is entirely accurate is open to debate, but it undeniably influences how her role is interpreted. And interpretation matters, because once the public begins seeing someone as central to the future of an institution, that perception can become a force in its own right. This is where the puzzle pieces start fitting together. The king's emphasis on continuity, William's expanding responsibilities, Catherine's increasing symbolic prominence, and the monarchy's broader effort to project stability all appear connected to a common objective. Each development, viewed separately, may seem routine. Viewed together, however, they begin to resemble parts of a much larger strategy designed to guide the institution through an unusually delicate period. But there is still one critical piece missing. Because even if preparations are quietly underway, even if responsibilities are gradually shifting, and even if certain figures are becoming increasingly central to the monarchy's future, none of that fully explains the timing. Why are these developments attracting such attention now? What specific pressures might be accelerating conversations that many assumed would remain distant for years? The answer may lie not in public ceremonies or symbolic gestures, but in private realities that few outside palace walls can fully see. And if those realities are influencing decisions more than anyone realizes, then the next stage of the story could change the entire way these events have been understood up to this point. The answer may lie not in public ceremonies or symbolic gestures, but in private realities that few outside palace walls can fully see. And if those realities are influencing decisions more than anyone realizes, then the next stage of the story could change the entire way these events have been understood up to this point. What makes the situation increasingly significant is that institutions often reveal their priorities not through what they announce, but through what they prepare for. Throughout history, royal households have learned that uncertainty itself can become a challenge. When questions about the future begin circulating publicly, confidence becomes almost as important as constitutional authority. The monarchy understands this better than most institutions because its survival has always depended on projecting continuity, even during periods of profound change. That may explain why recent developments have generated such intense discussion among royal commentators. Many observers have noticed that the conversations surrounding the future of the crown are no longer focused exclusively on succession itself. Instead, attention has shifted toward preparedness. There is a subtle but important difference between those two ideas. Succession concerns who eventually inherits authority. Preparedness concerns whether the institution is ready whenever that moment arrives, regardless of when it occurs. And that distinction changes everything. If the primary objective is preparedness, then decisions that might otherwise appear symbolic suddenly take on a different meaning. Actions become less about today's circumstances and more about tomorrow's uncertainties. Seen from that perspective, the growing prominence of certain figures begins to look less like coincidence and more like deliberate planning. But planning for what exactly? That question becomes especially important when examining the pressures facing modern monarchies. Unlike previous generations, today's royal family operates in an environment where public expectations evolve rapidly. Citizens expect transparency while also respecting privacy. They value tradition, but simultaneously demand relevance. Balancing those competing expectations has become one of the institution's greatest challenges. For senior royal advisors, this creates a difficult calculation. How do you preserve centuries of tradition while ensuring that future generations continue to see value in the institution? Some analysts believe the answer lies in trust. Not simply public trust, but institutional trust. The ability to identify individuals capable of carrying royal responsibilities into a new era without undermining the traditions that give the monarchy its legitimacy. This is where the broader significance of Catherine's position becomes increasingly apparent. For years, discussions surrounding the future of the monarchy largely centered on William's eventual role as king. More recently, however, another realization appears to have emerged among many royal observers. A future reign will not be judged solely by the actions of the sovereign. It will also be shaped by the strength of the team surrounding him. History repeatedly demonstrates this pattern. Some monarchs benefited enormously from trusted family members whose presence strengthened public confidence. Others faced difficulties when internal divisions overshadowed institutional priorities. The lesson is clear. Stability at the center often depends on stability around it. Could that be influencing decisions being made today? The possibility becomes harder to dismiss when viewed alongside the broader challenges confronting the royal family. Recent years have tested the institution in ways few could have predicted. Health concerns, changing public expectations, international scrutiny, and debates about the monarchy's future have all created pressures that extend far beyond ceremonial duties. Under such circumstances, reliability becomes exceptionally valuable. Not because it generates headlines, but because it prevents them. That reality may help explain why some palace watchers increasingly describe Catherine as a stabilizing force rather than simply a senior royal. Whether one agrees with that assessment or not, the perception itself carries consequences. Public confidence often develops around narratives, and the narrative surrounding the Princess of Wales has evolved considerably over the past several years. Yet another intriguing question emerges from this shift. How are other senior figures within the institution responding to these changing dynamics? Officially, the royal family continues to present a united front focused on duty and service. That has long been the monarchy's preferred approach during periods of intense public scrutiny. However, institutions are rarely static. As responsibilities evolve and circumstances change, relationships naturally adapt as well. This does not imply conflict. In fact, some royal commentators argue the opposite. They suggest that the gradual redistribution of responsibilities may reflect a coordinated effort to strengthen the institution collectively rather than elevate any one individual. If true, that would represent a remarkably disciplined strategy. Rather than waiting for external events to force rapid adjustments, the monarchy may be attempting to manage change gradually, ensuring that each transition feels natural rather than abrupt. Such an approach would align closely with the Crown's historical preference for evolution over revolution. Even so, the risks remain significant, because every strategy carries consequences. If preparations become too visible, they may intensify speculation about the future. If they remain too subtle, the public may fail to recognize the institution's efforts to ensure continuity. Finding the balance between those two outcomes requires extraordinary care. And this is where the story reaches perhaps its most consequential stage. The growing discussion is no longer simply about individual responsibilities, ceremonial symbolism, or shifting public perceptions. It is becoming a conversation about the monarchy's long-term resilience, about whether the institution can successfully navigate one of the most complex periods of transition in modern royal history while preserving the stability that has defined it for generations. That is why every development now carries greater weight than before, because each decision is being interpreted not only as a response to present circumstances, but as a clue about the future. Every appearance, every responsibility, every subtle adjustment contributes to a larger picture that remains incomplete. And perhaps that is the most fascinating part of all. Despite everything that has been discussed, despite the growing prominence of key figures and the increasing speculation surrounding the monarchy's future direction, the most important question remains unanswered. What if these developments are not the main story at all? What if they are merely the visible signs of a much deeper transformation already taking place behind palace walls, one whose full implications have yet to emerge, and whose ultimate impact could completely reshape how the public understands this entire chapter in royal history? And perhaps that is the most fascinating part of all. Despite everything that has been discussed, despite the growing prominence of key figures and the increasing speculation surrounding the monarchy's future direction, the most important question remains unanswered. What if these developments are not the main story at all? What if they are merely the visible signs of a much deeper transformation already taking place behind palace walls, one whose full implications have yet to emerge, and whose ultimate impact could completely reshape how the public understands this entire chapter in royal history? When viewed from that perspective, the significance of this story extends far beyond any individual decision, ceremonial responsibility, or symbolic gesture. What royal observers are really watching is something much larger, the gradual evolution of an institution that has survived for centuries precisely because it understands when to preserve tradition and when to quietly adapt to changing realities. That balancing act may ultimately define King Charles III's reign. Many monarchs are remembered not simply for what they achieved personally, but for how effectively they prepared the crown for the generation that followed. Some reigns are associated with expansion, others with modernization, and still others with stability during uncertain times. Increasingly, Charles's legacy may come to be judged by how successfully he navigates a period where continuity and transition appear to be unfolding simultaneously. And that is where the larger picture finally begins to come into focus. For years, conversations about the future of the monarchy were often framed as a distant question. One day Prince William would become king, one day Catherine would become queen, and one day a new era would begin. Yet what this story suggests is that the future may not arrive through a single dramatic moment at all. Instead, it may already be taking shape through hundreds of small decisions, carefully managed responsibilities, and deliberate efforts to strengthen the institution long before any formal transition occurs. In other words, the future of the monarchy may not begin on the day a crown changes hands. It may begin years earlier, while most people are focused elsewhere. That realization helps explain why so much attention has been directed toward figures who represent the next generation of royal leadership. not because they are replacing anyone, but because they are increasingly becoming the public face of what comes next. Their actions are being interpreted not only as reflections of current responsibilities, but as indicators of how the monarchy intends to evolve over the coming decades. Yet there is another implication that deserves attention. Throughout modern history, royal institutions have faced a recurring challenge. Each generation must convince the public that the monarchy remains relevant to contemporary life while preserving the traditions that make it unique. Lean too heavily toward change, and the institution risks losing its identity. Resist change completely, and it risks appearing disconnected from the society it serves. The solution has rarely been dramatic reform. Instead, successful monarchies often rely on gradual adjustment, allowing the public to become comfortable with new realities before those realities fully arrive. That approach appears remarkably consistent with what many commentators believe is happening today. And if that interpretation is correct, then Catherine's growing importance may reveal something profound about the monarchy's future priorities. Her public image has increasingly become associated with resilience, stability, service, and continuity. Those are not simply personal qualities. They are institutional qualities. They represent the exact characteristics the monarchy seeks to project during periods of uncertainty. Whether by design or by circumstance, her rise has come to symbolize something larger than individual popularity. It symbolizes confidence. Confidence that the next chapter of the royal family can maintain public trust. Confidence that future leadership can navigate challenges without abandoning tradition. Confidence that the institution itself remains capable of adapting to a changing world. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of this entire story is what it says about the monarchy's understanding of time. Political leaders often think in terms of election cycles. Businesses frequently think in terms of quarterly results. Monarchies think in generations. Their decisions are often designed not merely to address immediate concerns but to strengthen the institution decades into the future. That perspective changes how every recent development can be understood. What appears on the surface, as a response to present circumstances, may actually reflect preparation for challenges that have not yet arrived. What looks like symbolism may also serve as reassurance. What seems like a routine adjustment may form part of a much broader strategy designed to protect continuity in an uncertain age. And that may be the true reason royal observers continue paying such close attention. Because beneath the headlines, beneath the speculation, and beneath the public appearances, they believe they are witnessing the early stages of a generational shift. Not a sudden transfer of power, but a carefully managed transition of confidence, responsibility, and institutional trust. Whether history ultimately confirms that interpretation remains to be seen. What is clear, however, is that this story was never really about a single appointment, a single ceremony, or even a single individual. It was about the future direction of one of the world's oldest institutions and the people increasingly entrusted to carry that legacy forward. As the monarchy moves through this pivotal period, the questions surrounding duty, continuity, leadership, and succession will only become more important. And perhaps that is why developments that might once have seemed routine are now attracting such extraordinary attention. Because they may offer a glimpse of tomorrow long before tomorrow officially arrives. And so we return to the question at the heart of the story. Are these developments simply prudent preparations by a monarchy planning responsibly for the future, or are they early signs of a transformation already underway, one that could redefine how the royal family functions for a new generation? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the royal family, Prince William, Catherine, Princess of Wales, King Charles III, Princess, and the future of the monarchy, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next royal analysis. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video. Because sometimes the most important chapters in royal history do not begin with a coronation, they begin with subtle changes that only reveal their true significance years later.